Hi everyone, it's Elise from Kit and Clatter Colouring Classes, and today I'm going to be showing you a quick video tutorial on how I colour darker skin tones with markers. And you can apply this technique to absolutely any image that you're using in your projects. Now you'll find the information on the colours I'm using in the description below the video tutorial. I've also got different blends for other popular brands of markers listed if you're using a different brand to what I am today. Now this technique and video tutorial is actually a preview and chapter 1 from our brand new Magical Moments colouring class for markers, which is our May 2021 colouring project over at kitandclatter.com. If you'd like to colour the rest of the image up with me, you can find the full class over on my website. This is a great class for absolute beginners as I'll be breaking down all of the very basics of each technique, just like I'm going to be doing in this video tutorial here today. So even if you're new to colouring, this is going to be a great lesson for you to start with to help you start leveling up. Now, if you're already a class member, consider breaking down your classes into smaller goals like this, because this can be a really great way to start if you're a little bit nervous or you only have a limited amount of time. 10 minutes of colouring is all you need to make a start, to learn something new, and to take a mindful break for you to recharge and de-stress for your self-care. So let's go ahead and jump in. Now, when colouring any project, it's important to first keep in mind light source. Light source is anything that makes light in our scenes, and it must be present for an object to actually be seen. It's what determines the light and shade on an object. So we never want to ignore light source, and if you're new to colouring, sometimes learning these new theories can feel a little bit overwhelming. But it's important because it helps us create that depth. So typically in our classes, we work with what's called ambient lighting. So this is generally the most flattering lighting for an image like this where we have like a portrait or you have an animal, just that standard light. So ambient lighting is a major source of light in a scene, like the sun or overhead lighting that casts big cones of light over your entire project, rather than say spotlighting or directional light where you have one side light and one side dark. So when working with ambient lighting, the light hits the parts of the objects that are raised up toward those light rays, no matter what side the object or light is on. And the areas that are further back are what end up more in shadow because they're further away from that light. So when colouring an object like the face here, we want to think about what's popping out toward us. They're going to be the lightest and brightest parts, and we call these our highlights. Now, opposite that, we have our shadows, so the parts that are slanting or curving away from the light and are further back. Now, between your highlight and shadow, you have midtone, which is generally the true color of the object because it's not affected by light and shade. Now, one more thing we also want to think about is any objects that are overlapping. So when we're doing our colouring, whenever we have an object that's sitting in front or above something else, what happens is that object that's above casts a shadow on the object that's behind. So can you see that shadow there that's cast by my brush onto my hand? What this is doing is it's showing the distance between these objects, and we call this our cast shadow. It's a shadow that's cast by the object in front or above onto the object below or behind, and it helps to create the levels and distance and depth. So if we're going to colour up our skin tones here, a great starting point is to actually look for these cast shadows first, mainly so we don't forget them. I find that it's probably the thing people most ask for is how do I get more depth in our projects? But because they haven't learned that lighting theory, cast shadows is the number one thing left out. So we want to try and start incorporating them every time you're doing your colouring so you can really build that up. So if I look at my character here, easy places to see cast shadows is where things are overlapping. So even in the arm, you can see here this arm comes right in front, and you can see we've got a little bit of the armpit here and it goes into the chest area. Even though this is one object, we can think of this almost as two because we've got that line of the arm that comes right in front over here. So we're using that darker color just inside this area to help show the difference in those levels. This part here being further back and below the arm. Another really great starting point when we're colouring skin tones is to look at the hair. typically hair will come over and sit over the face area. So when the hair is in front, remember we have that cast shadow behind. So I've got my nice dark color here just around that hairline so I can show those levels. Now our character's face is turned a little bit in this lesson, so it's not as easy as if we're coloring straight on, because when we're coloring straight on it's very easy to see the different levels. So very quickly here, what I can see though is that the little tip of her nose, this would be quite prominent and high up. So the light would hit this area first, making it appear lighter. As we come down into the bridge of the nose where we have this dip, this is a lot further down. So we'd actually have a little bit of shadow in here in the valley of that bridge, creating a darker color. You can also do a little bit of contouring around the side of the face as well, showing how that's curving away and down from the light. When it comes to coloring up arms, we can think of these like geometric objects. So that's a really helpful tip. If you don't know how the light source is going to work on something, take a look at the object and start to think about what the closest geometric object is and how light affects that. So for example, the cylinder is very close to the arm. The middle pops out toward us and the sides curve away. That's the form of the object. So if the middle is popping out toward us, our light comes down and hits that middle part first. So the middle of your cylindrical objects is always brightest. The sides curving away is always darkest. So that's why through here, you'll notice we've got a little bit of the dark color on either side, with the middle being lightest. I usually see people color this up with a lighter color on top and a darker color to the bottom. To make that look the most rounded, we want to start adding the darker colors to both sides. Now don't worry again if this feels a little bit overwhelming hearing all of this theory. As soon as we get started, it makes a lot more sense and you'll be seeing in application how we do this. So let's go ahead and jump in and just apply some of the things we've just talked about. I'm just going to move this off the page for now. So let's start with the arm area. I'm going to start with my darkest color, which is a little bit of E25. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop in and apply a little detail where the elbow is, and I'm going to extend a little bit of line of color back. Now I'm leaving a very small strip of white here at the very edge. This is optional, you don't need to leave this if you feel it's a little tricky. But what this is a little bit of reflected light. As our object is curving around, our light hits and reflects back on this underside, so you just get that really light sheen of a slightly lighter color. It won't be staying white, it's just going to be more toward that highlight color there. So it requires a little bit of a fine line, but just do what you're comfortable with. If you don't get it today, it's something that you can just work toward. Notice that I'm applying the E25 along the top of the arm here as well. So we're adding those darker colors to both sides so we can create that rounded look. I'm going to do a cast shadow under each of these bangles. So the bangles are sitting over the arm, so we'd have a shadow underneath each one. Coming up the hand, and again we've got a lot of overlapping little details here. So I'm going to apply my darkest color underneath each of the fingers here so I can start to create those levels. Now into this armpit area, I'm applying this E25 quite heavily in here so I can show that that's further back. And I'm also going to do a nice cast shadow up the side of her top. I'm also going to come under the top here doing the belly area as well. Now let's just do that to begin with. We can come back and do the other bits shortly. So now what I'm going to do is blend this out, and I've got my E13 and I'm just coming straight over the top. I'm doing multiple strokes until the line of that previous color underneath has just softened out a little bit. So the whole idea with markers is that you're layering and building up the color. I'm not pushing the marker down. So what I want you to avoid is coming in and pushing this onto the page like this, like as if you were writing. It's not how we do our coloring with our markers. What we want to do is just hold the marker really nice and soft and think about just hitting the tip of that marker to the paper. And you can see I'm barely touching the marker down. It's just a really light feather touch over and over. Let me just bring this back. And if you still have a line between the colors, all this means is that you want to spend a little bit more time building up your layers before you move on to the next color in the blend. Now I'm just trying to come around the little tattoo here. If you end up losing that detail, it's totally okay. Remember, whenever you're doing a class or a lesson, the whole point is just to learn some new skills or build upon some skills you already have. You don't need to get everything perfect. Not every mark needs to be in the exact right spot. As long as we're learning some new skills, building upon what we know, then we're succeeding. So try not to place any pressure today on getting fine lines or getting everything perfect, because all that can do is lead to frustration. Instead, we're just hoping to learn some new skills and refine our control. Now once you're finished with that, I'm grabbing my lightest color in the blend, which is E11, and I'm just doing multiple strokes over where the E13 has now ended. So you can see there I'm trying to soften out where that last color has ended, and then I come back and build over the remaining area with a quick stroke of the color. So the whole idea with markers is you can basically just continue to build and layer and blend it up all nice and smooth. So if you ever have lines between, it just means you can come back and keep working that. Now you'll notice that I've gone dark to light there. If you've learnt light to dark before, there's no difference between the two in terms of end result. Light to dark can feel a little bit less scary because you're starting out with a lighter color and building it up. However, you typically will use more ink. So in the long term, light to dark is probably going to cost you a little bit more money. Personally, I prefer to do dark to light just to save on that. I'm a little bit thrifty. So that's why I'm teaching you dark to light, but whatever you're comfortable with is more than okay. Now, whether you're going light to dark or dark to light, what you'll notice is after you've done one full round of the blend, what can happen is that lighter color has pulled away some of the darker depth in your blending. Now think about how alcohol markers work. So alcohol markers is alcohol and the dye component mixed together. So as we blend, we're essentially adding more alcohol with a diluted color over the top of your darker color. That's how we're blending out. So if I'm adding lighter colored alcohol over my darker color alcohol, I'm softening down that darker color on the page. So what can happen is the colors can appear a lot lighter and less vibrant. To combat this, I can repeat everything again, which will make my colors a little bit stronger on the page. This can be really helpful as well if you are really light-handed with your darker color and your blend is quite light at the moment. Don't forget we're going for a darker skin tone here today, so you don't need to be really super thin with your darker colors. A bit of thickness is just going to help give more depth to your blend, a darker value of color. So all I do is I just grab my E25 back and I'm just applying it straight over where I just added it previously. Now again, don't try so hard to get those lines super duper fine. Allow yourself to have a little bit of thickness here and see how that gives you more depth in your blend. That's a really important tip for when you do your coloring. You can control the value of a blend, and value is how light or dark a color blend is, by how much or how little of each color you use. So if you're using more of the darker color in your blend, the blend's going to end up darker overall. If you scale it back and only use a small amount, then you're going to end up with a lighter color blend. Now we grab our E13 and we come straight over the top and we repeat our blending. So it's literally the same thing, but notice now all of a sudden my colors feel a lot richer on the page because I've already got that base of color underneath. So I'm able to really build this up and get a bit more control over the depth of that blend. Multiple strokes and you're just aiming to soften that out. Don't worry if it feels a little bit messy around the bangles for now. When we come back and add that color, it'll be a lot clearer. And then my E11. And the same thing, multiple strokes over where the last color has ended, get it smooth, and then blend it out, add in those extra layers. Okay. Now, when you're doing skin tone, what I find is when you just start with skin, it can always feel a little bit funny and a little bit incomplete. That's because on the page, it doesn't actually look like a whole lot. It can look really out of place with all of the white around it. So I just want to take the time to show you, this is where you're probably at right now. This is it finished up. So keep in mind, you've got to go from this to this. So it's always going to feel funny at that halfway point. We really want to keep going to see how that comes together and give us that perspective. So try not to judge too much and think, oh, is this right? Am I on the right track? As you keep going with your projects, actually completing techniques is one of the biggest motivators and the biggest lessons that you have, because it teaches you how things come together, how we have perspective, and how we finish and create those techniques. Now I'm going to come into the face and do some of the detail here, but before I do, I'm just going to do the lips. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of R20, start nice and light so I can have that control. And all we're doing here is we're just dabbing the marker to the lip area. So this is a small touch. I'm very, very lightly just dabbing that marker in. Now remember, we're only just lightly touching the tip of the marker to the page. If you feel you're still heavy-handed, have a look at the way you're holding the marker. I try and rest my marker on my second last finger here. I know some people though rest it on the last one. When we rest on the last finger, what happens is if I go to push my hand down, you can see my marker is so close to the paper and it just hits that paper quite strongly. If I lift it up and I move my hand down, notice I'm not actually touching the paper. So I have that control to actually come in and just place the tip down on the page. Now that's just how I hold my marker. A lot of people have said it's helped for them. So have a look at it. It might feel uncomfortable. It might not work for you. But if you are really struggling with getting that fine and soft touch, then this might be something for you to practice that will actually help. Okay, now once you've done that, I'm going to add a little bit of a depth. I'm going to come in with R22 and I'm just going to apply straight over the top. So I did the lighter color first just so I could make sure I was happy with the shape, and then I can just trace it with this next color. Now I'm going to come in and do the detail with my brown colors. Now again, if you're nervous, you can start with a lighter color. So let me show you how to do this. We can start with E11. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come along the bottom of the chin. I'm going to do my cast shadow in and around the hair. I'm going to do a little bit of dip where that bridge of the nose is. And down the side of the eyes there too. Now where you've got the nose here, I'm going to dab just a little bit in the nostril area. Now if you're feeling brave, leave a gap and do a little U shape here to do the side of the nostril. Now this is totally optional. My image is a little bit small here, so you might not feel comfortable doing that yet if you're just starting out. Remember though that learning is all about just having a go. So sometimes we do some techniques and we don't love our outcome, but it helps us improve and grow for next time. So I'd recommend even printing your images out twice and just having a go again so you can have a feel for the techniques, and even if you do make a mistake, it's still a little bit of marker control practice and helping you level up. Once you're happy with everything, I just grab my E25 and I come back in to deepen the blend. So I'm literally just tracing where I just added that before. And I like to, this is really small here, but I like to add a little bit straight through the middle of the lips. It just adds a little bit more depth through there. If you've got a little dark brown pencil, you can always do that at the end with that as well. It just defines the lip area. So that is definitely a little bit more advanced, but I like to show you exactly how I'm doing it rather than leave any tricks aside. So it's only because she's on a side face to us. This is E13 next, and I'm just going straight over the top and blending this out. Don't worry if you get a little bit of color in the hair or in other parts. As we come back and do our blending, you always cover those areas so you don't see anything. Notice in the nostril, I'm blending away from the top of the nose. So we always keep the nose nice and light, but you can blend into the cheek area here because you're creating that contour. So your blending doesn't have to be super fine. It's okay for this to look messy because as you come through and layer up, and this is now E11, that's when you soften it all out and when you get that contouring happening on the page. So you can see blending away from that nose area. And you can even try and leave just a little slither of white on the bridge of the nose as well, which can help to create the levels. Alright, now we're almost done. We just have the arms and the feet left. So I'm just going to move this over. I'm going to come in with a little bit of E25 in my arm area here now. So I'm coming along the bottom and then along the top. You can see extending the lines in where I have my elbow area. Got our little fingers on the side and I'm applying to the bottom of each of these. They are quite small, so just the bottom is fine. And then into the legs. Same thing now, these are cylindrical in shape, so I'm going to add color to both sides and the middle popping out toward us will be the lightest. Notice I'm doing a nice thick cast shadow below the pants there as well. Coming into the ankle. And I've got a little bit of contouring to create the different levels and heights there. Into the bottom it's the same thing, so I'm going to come underneath the pants legs, applying shading to either side. Alright, the next color is E13, straight over the top. You can see I'm just blending that out. If you have lines between the colors, apply multiple strokes to help you get that smooth. And then a little bit of E11. Again, blending out smooth the line of the previous color, and then you can just bring that through the highlight area. Now you can repeat that if you feel it needs it. Remember, we all color a little bit differently, so sometimes you may feel like you don't need to do that extra round of color. Just have a look at your work and see whether you're happy with that level of depth, and if you feel an extra coat would help enhance and deepen even further. But that is actually the skin tone all done. Now remember, again, at this point, it always feels a little bit funny with just the skin done on the paper. We want to go from this to this as we finish up our coloring, and as soon as you add the hair, that just helps those features to make a little bit more sense, give you a little bit more perspective of what it is you're coloring up. Now remember, this technique can be applied to absolutely any image at all, so practice. If you find it tricky, that's a good thing because it actually means that this was a lesson you needed to do. Anytime you find a lesson or tutorial challenging, it's an area that you don't have a lot of experience in. So we actually want to push and try it again and practice it because that's giving you the experience to help you level up. So don't ever feel like you're a failure if something has pushed you. That's exactly what we want to achieve here today, and it's helping you grow, helping you improve, which is why you're doing this lesson in the first place. I hope you've enjoyed this quick lesson on how to color up darker skin tones. If you'd like to try the rest of the image with me, you can find the full class over at kitandclouder.com. Remember, we'll be breaking down all of the very basics, so even if you're new to coloring, this is going to be a great lesson for you. But remember, coloring takes time and practice to learn, so your results may not be instantly the same as mine or others you may see, but the more you practice, the easier it gets. The only way you fail is by never having a go. So that's the one time you can't improve. So give yourself a big pat on the back today for growing in your coloring and taking that next step. I'd love to see you in the classroom, so try the rest of this image with me. Thanks so much and happy coloring.